Good morning. This is Pastor Ryan with another reflection. I want to apologize for the tardiness of this daily office reflection. I was unable to get it done sooner. But today, one of our Psalms from the daily office is from Psalm 91. And it reads, "As someone who lives in the shelter of the one on high, who stays in the shade of the shade, I say of Yahweh, my refuge, my stronghold, my God in whom I trust. Because he is the one who will rescue you from the trapper's snare, from the devastating epidemic. With his pinions he will cover you, and under his wings you will find refuge. His truthfulness will be a body shield, a rampart. You need not be afraid of a terror by night, of an arrow that flies by day, of an epidemic that walks in the dark, of a scourge that destroys at noon. 1,000 may fall at your side, 10,000 at your right hand. It will not reach you. You will just look with your eyes and see the recompense of the faithless, because you are one who has made Yahweh my refuge, the one on high your shelter. No evil will be given access to you. No harm will approach your tent, because he will command his angels to guard you in all your ways, and they will carry you on their hands so that your foot does not crash into a stone. You will tread on a cub and a viper, and you will trample on lion and serpent. Because he is devoted to me, I will rescue him. I will lift him to safety because he has acknowledged my name. He will call me and I will answer. I will be with him in trouble. I will save him and honor him. I will fill him with long days and show him my deliverance." So I thought that this was an interesting psalm for us today, in particular when it says things like, because he is the one who will rescue from the trapper's snare, from the devastating epidemic. Or you need not be afraid of a terror by night, of an arrow that flies by day, of an epidemic that walks in the dark. So you need not be afraid, and he will rescue you from a devastating epidemic. Those are what the psalm reading for today calls for. I'm amazed at how often the psalms speak to exactly where we are, regardless of our situation in life, whether we're alone, whether we are going through both an epidemic or even a pandemic. And these words are reassuring that we will not be touched from a devastating epidemic. And it may cause people to think that they don't have, if you have faith, then you won't catch it. And in fact, there have been times when during plagues, people would say, oh, well, if that person had more faith, then they wouldn't be affected by that. But this is not the correct reading of this passage. For one, there's a good chance that this psalm was written specifically speaking of King David. And so it's possible for this to be a psalm and a prophecy directed at one person that not all people are qualified for. However, it is included in the Psalter. It's a part of the Bible, and so it does not only speak to its original audience, right? The Bible is written to specific people, and so we have to pay attention to the original audience, but it applies to others as well. So what is a potential application for us? There's plenty in here about being devoted, about being faithful, and I feel like I've talked about that a lot, about continuing to be faithful. But in this, I think there is a further meaning here for us today. And I think one of the ways that we as Christians read this is we read it Christologically, meaning we read it in relationship to Jesus. So when we read this and we hear that he will send his angels concerning you, it ought to make us think of Matthew chapter 4, where the devil uses this passage to try to tempt Jesus into throwing himself off the Temple Mount, or off a very high place. And Jesus responds with, "Do not put your Lord your God to the test." So the devil is misinterpreting this passage, saying that basically if you have faith, then you'll be invincible. But we know that's not true. We know that there are faithful people who have experienced death at the hand of plagues, death at the hand of evil people. I mean, there are plenty of martyrs. And so it seems like there's what John Goldingay calls two facets of facts, that God is faithful, but then also that there is trouble. So if we read this Christologically and we think, there are people who die because of not just because of their faith, but there are people who are faithful, who trust in God, who still die from disease. How do we read this? And if we connect it to Jesus, there is no greater denial of this verse than Jesus's own crucifixion. Why on earth, if this is a psalm directed at King David and then at the Davidic line, how is it that Jesus could be crucified? How is it that the King of Kings and Lord of Lords, the Prince of Peace, suffered evil? Was God faithless to him? And could we read into Jesus's words on the cross, Eloi, Eloi, lama sabachthani, which means, my God, why have you forsaken me? Do we read into it that God has forsaken Jesus? There are definitely times when we feel as though God has forgotten us. But if we read this Christologically, we know that God was faithful to Jesus, and that Jesus had no fear, and that saint had no need for fear, though he did fear the cross. I mean, he asked if there was any other way that the cup be taken from him. So clearly, whether that's burnings or stonings or crucifixion or any number of tortures that Christians have experienced, and there is a real fear there. And yet there is also an assurance that we have in faith, an assurance that Jesus has conquered the grave. And that's what 1 Corinthians chapter 15 speaks to. Death, where is your victory? Where is your sting? And so we don't need to fear. One of my ethics professors, I took a course on death and the care at end of life. And it talked a lot about the Ars Moriendi, which was the good death. How do Christians die well? And my professor, whose name escapes me, and I'm going to double check his name. Yes, Dr. Alan Verhey. I have several of his books. He's a great guy. He's actually from West Michigan. He used to teach at Hope College for a while. Dr. Verhey would often say that death is a great evil, but it is not the greatest evil. The greatest evil is faithlessness. So death is a great evil. It is awful. Pain is a great evil, but faithlessness is a greater evil. And we will often be faithless, but God is faithful. Even if our bodies die, there is the hope of the resurrection, when we will be reunited with Christ, when we will be known fully, when all shall be well, all manner of things shall be well. When on the last day, when the trumpet sounds and the heavenly city descends, that glorious day, we can live in the hope of the resurrection, which has been secured by Christ. So Psalm 91 may seem to be a bit of a lie to us, that no, there are people who are going to die in the pandemic. Clearly, there have been thousands of people who have already died from this disease. And there are people of faith. One of the Chinese doctors who first started treating people, he passed away, but he was a person of faith. And I heard yesterday that some doctors from, I think, Johns Hopkins were getting video conferenced in from China, and the Chinese doctors were training the American doctors as to how to treat the pandemic. And the last thing they did was to pray for these American doctors. So I think that's a great thing. I think we can have faith and trust in this, recognizing that our ultimate hope, our final hope, is in God's resurrection, when we have our new bodies, when the mortal takes on the immortal, when the perishable takes on the imperishable. And so that is our hope, is Jesus' resurrection. I pray you have a great rest of your day, that you're able to live trusting in the resurrection rather than fearing this pandemic, rather than fearing what losses you may have, but you live in the power of the Holy Spirit. God bless you.